Thank you, Andrew. And thank you all for tuning in this evening. Thank you very much for inviting me to talk to the Carmarthenshire Meadows group as well. I work at the University of Exeter, but I'm lucky to be at the Falmouth campus of the University of Exeter in the Environment and Sustainability Institute, and have been working for many years on bees and other flower visiting pollinators. And I've called this talk Cornwall, Changing the Scene for Pollinators and People. And I'm going to give you some of the, go through some of the projects that we're doing on working with a lot of partners across Cornwall. That includes BugLife, who are in the audience, which is fantastic. And really the work that I'm going to talk about is from my research group, and Grace Twiston-Davies, Matthias Becker, Ben Phillips and Ros Shaw have done pretty much all the work in this presentation. So big shout out to them. Has it changed a slide? That's good, hopefully. So just to summarise what our research group is, this is our Environment and Sustainability Institute here on the right. And most of the last 30 years I've spent looking at the behaviour and ecology of bees, bumblebees in particular, and some other pollinators, with the main aims of understanding and conserving those pollinator populations and protecting and promoting pollination of wild crops and plants. So those big aims, but actually pollinators are not just flower visiting insects that do an important job, they're also a flagship group and that can drive action on biodiversity more broadly. And I think that's what we're finding with some of the work that we're doing, and I'm going to explain to you today. But I did used to work at Rothamsted Research. Back in the day, I was at Rothamsted for about 17 years doing bee research with this fellow on the right, who you probably recognise, Andrew Martin, a great buddy and an amazing colleague who spent many years working with me on bumblebee ecology, honeybee ecology, spent a lot of time out in the sunshine by the looks of it, doing all sorts of things with bees, tagging them, marking them, pioneering the use of radar to track bees. And we're putting up a pollination cage here, whatever else it might look like. So a lot of the work that's behind what we're delivering today in Cornwall comes from that very productive period done at Rothamsted. So why Cornwall? Well, Cornwall is a haven for bees, for one thing, and if you want to know more about the bumblebees, particularly in Cornwall and Scilly, I recommend you can get hold of this Atlas of Bumblebees in Cornwall and Scilly by Paddy Saunders, probably on the Cornwall Wildlife Trust site, certainly on the ERCSIS site. And we do have some of the rarer species of bee down in Cornwall. One here is the bumblebee Bombus humilis, and solitary bee Eucera longicornis here I've just used as in an illustration. And from these distribution maps, you can see that actually these are scattered, but they're appearing around the edges of the peninsula, so in the coastal regions. And that's not surprising, because whilst Cornwall might be a haven for bees, it's actually mostly a green desert, I would call it. So our wonderful green and rolling landscape is in fact not very good for most biodiversity, with relatively intensively managed farmland without much biodiversity, which you know a lot about, and I'm sure all of you know more about diversity of meadows than I do particularly. But one of my aims when I moved down to Cornwall and to the University of Exeter back in 2012 was to try and turn Cornwall from a green desert into something a bit more multicoloured and diverse, which will then bring in not only the pollinators but other wildlife as well. And we're working hard with people like the Cornwall Area of Outstanding Natural Beauty Unit, who are based in the Cornwall Council. And the reason why this has been so productive is because actually Cornwall is pretty progressive in how it's looking at its wildlife and its landscape. Cornwall's environmental growth strategy, which has been developed by Cornwall Council in association with a lot of the different organisations, has the aim that Cornwall's environment will be naturally diverse, beautiful and healthy, supporting a thriving society, prosperous economy and abundance of wildlife by 2065. Now, who could ask for anything better than that, really? But actually there is real meat and actions behind that ambition, and the word growth has been used here with the idea of expanding the good, healthy and biodiverse environment, so having more of it than we've lost, if you like. And of course, there's a Cornwall Pollinator Action Plan as well, which has been developed. I think it was probably developed later than the Welsh one, but that has some great actions in it as well. So we have a good background to get started on some of this work. So here's a summary of some of the research projects we've got going on in the group here, and lots of funders up on the top of the screen there. I'm just going to talk to you about the top 3 today, which I'll go through in a moment. But some of the other work that we've been working on is crop pollination with some of the farmers in the area, quite a large horticultural many horticultural growers in the southwest, and for example courgette pollination. Done a lot of work in Cornish gardens, and most recently we're doing a lot of work on the potential invasion of Asian hornet in the UK. And actually don't have that as part of this talk, and it may not be as relevant to you as a Meadows group, but if there's anyone interested in Asian hornets at the end, I've got a few slides if you do want to know more about that. But today I'm going to focus on these 3 projects, which are particularly about working with the community to change the scene in Cornwall. And the first one of those is called Bee Steward, and that's using a sort of complex modelling approach really as a decision support tool to help farmers and landowners. A PhD with Ben that is being done by Ben Phillips, who's working on road verges for pollinators. And the third project is catchy title of Green Infrastructure for Growth, which is a Cornwall Council project, basically about making space for nature in the green spaces in Cornish towns. So that's the talk outline. I'm going to go through those 3 projects, and all of them really are helping us turn an intensive green landscape into something much more diverse, and not just for pollinators but for other wildlife and people too. Really the reason being that, having worked for many years on pollinator ecology and persuading people to do pollinator conservation, it's only occurred really in the last few years how important it is to not only get ecological benefits out of a project and persuade people about the ecological benefits, but also if there can be benefits to a conservation scheme for people, so social benefits and potentially economic benefits in terms of businesses. If you can get all of those 3 things right, you're much more likely that people are going to take up different conservation options and stick with them, and those are going to spread. So it's about the ecology, the social outcomes, and the economic outcomes at the same time, if you can get all of those right. Okay, let's start with the project on Bee Steward and Bees for Business, which Grace Twiston Davis has been leading. And really, as a background, where we started with all this was trying to understand pollinator declines and bumblebee declines in particular. And as we all know, they're caused by a huge combination of factors. Right toppermost, I would put habitat loss in there, and the reduction in food availability for those bees, and reduction in their nest site availability. The management of that land in terms of pesticides or light pollution and all sorts of other things we can consider are affecting those wild populations of insects. Changing disease and parasite load. Here's a bumblebee with deformed wing virus here, which doesn't do it any good at all. Potentially changing predator populations, maybe badgers, and climate change. So this complexity of factors makes it rather difficult to study them and understand what are the most important ones. And one needs to understand how a bee moves around, or another pollinator moves around in relation to the landscape, so that you can understand how to manage the landscape that's going to promote those pollinator populations. So we spent a lot of time back at Rothamsted studying how far bees move from their hive or from their colonies, which crops or wildflowers they end up foraging on, why they make those decisions, how far away they are, and all the dynamics of the landscape and the pollinator interaction. So lots of people have been working on this over the years, so there's lots of evidence about how landscape pollinator interactions develop and the dynamics of that. The important thing is that you can't necessarily do easy experiments in the field to understand which other factors are affecting the bees and separate out those factors in field experiments. So the way we've tried to look at that is to develop a virtual bee population in the computer, so a model of a bee population. And this is Matthias Becher, who was a postdoc with me for many years, who built these amazing bee models. And the one I'm going to show you today is called BumbleBEEHAVE, and it models the population of bumblebees in a landscape. Now, we as researchers wanted this model because we wanted to be able to play in the model with different levels of pesticide or different levels of disease or different foraging landscapes to understand how that bumblebee population might survive and thrive or not. So what you can see here is the sort of front end of the model, which looks very complicated, but this patchy picture here is a background landscape. In this case, we've got oilseed rape crops here, we've got grass fields, we've got some woodland in red. Really, you can import any map of a landscape into this. And the little bees you can see, the images here, denote where the model has a bumblebee nest or bumblebee colony. And as the model runs along, you get the graphs which show how many nests you've got in the landscape, how many foragers are making trips, and really the virtual world of a bumblebee population in the landscape. And you can run this model over years in the space of an hour and try it with all sorts of different planting scenarios, if you like, in the landscape by adding different maps. And that can give you an idea of how much effect you might have on the bumblebee population with changes that you make to the landscape. So it's been very valuable to us as researchers. You'll spot that there's some little badger faces on here, so we can include predation in the model as well. But from a practical point of view and from a farmer's point of view, what they need is a front end where they can put in different ideas that they have about how they might manage their landscape and see how it might affect the bees in their landscape. So we turned that, a sort of research model, into a model called Bee Steward, which can be used to, this is Grace Twiston Davies here, who's been using this model with farmers and putting in maps of their farms and showing them where the bees are most likely to be in their landscapes and how they are likely to survive in the landscape if they take up different options. This little report on the left actually doesn't show a huge amount of difference, but this is running in the landscape that they have today, for example, and then the red bars are where they may have added a clover field or planted some clover in particular fields. So you can run different scenarios and the farmer can say, well, what if I laid over three fields to herbal lays or something? And then with the nectar and pollen that we know that produces, we can estimate what that's likely to do to their bees. And we found this actually a really useful tool for encouraging farmers to do something different with their land. And I don't know how the sound's going to work out with this. So Andrew, please shout if it's not working, but I've just got a 2-minute video showing how it's been used with the Area of Outstanding Natural Beauty unit. Okay.
There's a lot of different reasons, I guess, for protecting Cornwall's landscape. Cornwall's Area of Outstanding Natural Beauty really has a large role to play in that protection. Cornwall's economy really relies on its landscape. The key species set, it's really critical in terms of economy and wildlife, are bees and pollinators. The A&B partnership really wanted to do something proactive for pollinators, and our Farms for A&Bees project is one of those, working in partnership with the University of Exeter in Comish.
Every farm has to be profitable, so you're always looking at ways to make the most of all your land. Grace came up, showed us where the bee colonies were likely to be, and then showed us all the different options that we could choose for ways to manage our areas that we don't crop, and shown us that just by making a few small changes we can increase the pollinators around, which will in turn have a benefit to our crops that we're growing.
Subsidies might not be the same in a few years' time, so we have to look at utilising our ground as effectively as we can. We really just want to see a healthier environment on our farms, choose which options we can use for the countryside stewardship, and really make an informed choice as to what we're going to do.
The objectives for farmers and the objectives for conservationists are absolutely aligned on this issue. Farmers need bees, farmers need pollinators, and we want to see bees conserved in the landscape. The more farmers and land managers that can get involved in this, the better, really.
Okay, so hopefully that shows you that how we can work with the landowners and the land stewards themselves to try and make that difference. So we've then moved on from working with just farmers actually to working with a huge variety of partners. and businesses to try and who have an interest in the land, and sometimes they only have small amounts of land, sometimes they're managing large amounts of land, for example holiday parks and visitor destinations in Cornwall, and they're all really interested in how they can improve things. And so we've run a series of workshops, and Grace will run reports from the bee steward model and offer them advice from that, so that we can build new projects and build new opportunities to change landscapes. Here's an example from the Lethitep estate, where there's a group of farmers understanding how they're producing those perennial meadows and what they do to create those. And as you can see, we have a wide range of partners working on that particular project, which comes under the SWEEP project, which is a NERC funded project to work with partners in the region. So far, Grace has been busy in the last 2 years. She's worked with over 142 stakeholders, which include, as I said, farms, holiday parks, breweries, food and drink companies, visitor sites. And from amongst those stakeholders, they have pledged to create 545 hectares of new pollinator habitats, enhance 391 hectares of grassland by seeding it with wildflower mixtures and or managing it differently. The Duchy of Cornwall, which owns most of the land in Cornwall, or a very large amount of land in Cornwall, and a lot of tenancies, and now incorporates pollinators and natural capital and biodiversity much more broadly in its management plans, and is working with Grace very actively on how it can do that even better. And we've also had success with other organisations who are using our bee steward model to put into projects that they get funded to improve pollinators. So that's perfect, really, that we're sort of seeding them with the evidence that they can use to then put these conservation initiatives into practice, because we're not the practical practitioners of the conservation. And it's really valuable if people like the Bumblebee Conservation Trust and indeed BugLife and the AOMB can take up the methods that we're using to promote conservation practice. The second string to this SWEEP project that Grace is involved in is actually, we then started thinking about whether we could calculate the business opportunity, if you like, of wildflower seed production alongside restoration of pollinator habitats, because it's completely fabulous if people will say, actually, yes, I want to turn over this piece of land to a perennial wildflower meadow and manage it as a hay meadow. That's fantastic, but actually that's not necessarily straightforward, and people who have farmers are under the cosh anyway financially, and if we can find some economic benefit to them getting into thinking about wildflowers and wildflower seeds in a different way, that may provide some of the benefits. There's a massive demand at the moment for local grown wildflower seed from farmers, businesses and local government, hundreds of kilos needed each year. But actually it's in demand, particularly yellow rattle. It's very hard to get hold of down in Cornwall, particularly that's produced in Cornwall. So we started thinking about developing a business case for growing wildflowers. And there's two ways in which Grace is taking this forward. The first one is called Meadow Match, which is a project in collaboration with Plant Life. And the second one, which might be anathema to you as meadow growers, is actually how can we think about annual wildflowers as a crop for these farmers, and what that would mean for the landscape in terms of the nectar and pollen that those wildflowers would produce if they're being grown as a crop, and providing economic benefit to the farmers as well. So the Meadow Match part of the scheme is more about perennial meadows, and that's where we're matching up donor sites with receptor sites who want to try and grow species-rich perennial grassland, and Grace is creating a database of those. I guess your Meadows group is something similar in a way, and that's been piloted so far. And the sort of things that are being explored in that are actually how you assess the condition of those sites in the first place, which ones are the best match, the timing of the donor meadow with the receptor of potentially the green hay, of course, the equipment and the costs, assessing the value or price of that green hay. But even more importantly, we've realised that it's not just about the green hay. This is our own little bit of meadow where we're giving away green hay to our neighbour here last year. It's not just about the seed in that green hay and just passing it over. It's actually about the knowledge and skills that that particular farmer or landowner has to pass on to somebody who's just starting in creating a meadow. So it's looking at all of that and what could be the benefits for farmers in getting involved in that scheme. As I said the second part of that is about annual wildflowers, and this has got a huge interest, and we're just waiting to see if we've got a bit more funding to carry it further forwards, because there's several farmers who are super interested in growing annual wildflowers, A, because they might want to harvest the seed, in this case for nutraceutical oils, B, because they actually want they will sell the seed as wildflower seed. C, because it can be seen as a visitor attraction. People love seeing these fields, and in a tourist destination like Cornwall, this is making quite a difference. We had several fields of sunflowers being grown this year, where people were were able to go and visit, and they would pay to go and visit as well, and that money went to charity in this case this year. And the company was growing those sunflowers for the oil. So this is just the start of things that could go be used over a much wider landscape. I think one of the best examples we've got is the Lost Gardens of Heligan, who we've been working with on this project, and Alistair Moore here, who's the sort of head of estates management there, is a complete convert. They grew this field of annuals last year. I think that was the first year, a 13-acre site, and they netted a £17,000 net profit from the seed. They also had massive number of visitors. We said it was their favourite part of Heligan at that time of the year, and it's attracting more visitors in, so it's having a benefit for those visitors in terms of the enjoyment they get potentially on their health and well-being during the COVID crisis, I guess, is what we're hearing in the news. There's an economic benefit. Heligan can see that this makes sense money-wise, and look at the amount of nectar and pollen that field is likely to be pumping out for the flower visitors. So we're ticking all the boxes there. So we're hoping to expand that even further and set up maybe 10 of those sort of demonstration sites this year if we can get some more funding to do that. Moving on to the second project I was going to talk about, which is about road verges and pollinators and the work that's being done with Ben Phillips. I should have said, actually, Grace has also been working with BugLife on the beelines project in Cornwall, but BugLife have been also quite involved in our road verge project, and so big shout out to them. And the next thing I'm going to show is the result of a review that Beth Roberts and Ben did with BugLife. In Cornwall, our Cornish hedges are one of our jewels in the crown, and road verges potentially offer great potential, again, to increase wildlife and pollinators in particular. So when we look at a map of roads across the UK, very often it looks like this, because only the motorways and the A roads are plotted. But actually, if you plot all the minor roads as well, it looks like it covers the whole map, and there's 400,000 kilometres across the UK. Now, you'll probably say, well, that's because of the scale of this particular map. But actually, Ben has done a really pretty complex bit of spatial analysis here. And this shading shows how close any 100 metres square in the UK is to a road. And I've got the figures here. So only 12% of the land is more than a kilometre from a road. 75% of land is less than 530 metres from a road. So, and most land is basically within 200 metres of a road. Most land in the UK, even in the very rural areas, we're within 200 metres of a road. So they are pervasive and potentially have huge effects on wildlife and biodiversity, of course, for lots of different reasons, because of the hard surfacing itself, taking out habitat, multiple sources of pollution from roads, potentially collisions are going to have an effect as well, and they fragment the habitat. So there's lots of downsides to the roads in terms of biodiversity, but there's actually potentially solutions, because verges are calculated by Ben's estimates to cover about 1% of Great Britain. Now that's quite significant. They're managed by big contractors as well. So potentially there's quite a lot of space to do stuff that is useful to nature, as long as you are not you can get the benefits to outweigh the costs, if you like. So that's why we need evidence-based management. And again, this has been done in direct connection with Plant Life as well, who are very strong on road verges. So this was the paper that came out from a review that Beth Roberts and Ben did with BugLife, and basically it looked I'm not going to take you through this diagram now because I'm just showing this so that you can have a look at the review if you like, but basically it looked at all the literature to see how much evidence there is of whether they are going to be good or bad for pollinators, whether road verges can be good or bad or both for pollinators. And yes, verges can be hotspots for flowers and pollinators, we know that, but the evidence suggests that the benefits could outweigh the costs if they're managed strategically. So then Ben did some collection of data to actually see what was going on with pollinators in road verges, and he did this across 19 study sites in Cornwall, from A roads to rural roads, with varying width of the verges and varying traffic as well, volumes from 8 to 708 vehicles per hour. Obviously, we're not in the southeast, so those are still probably relatively low compared to the southeast, but it's a good range. And they were next to fields, mostly pastoral arable fields. And what he did was simply to survey the flowers, abundance and species richness, and pollinators. I say pollinators, but I really mean flower visiting insects. Don't get me started on that debate, but pollinators for sure. In different places across the verge and into the field, adjacent field and hedge. So this is the sort of design of where he did those surveys. He did it 3 times in the season as well. The verge edge, which is next to the road here, the center of the verge is about here, and the verge next to the hedge, if there was a hedge there. He then did one on the other side of the hedge in the field centre, and a control over on a field hedge as well, to look at the diversity and abundance of pollinators and flowers through the season. What you find is this graph down on the right here, and you can see this is in parallel to those same position points there. So you find that actually in the road verge, as well as in the hedge in the field, you get a high abundance of flowers, high number of flower species and pollinators. So road verges are just as good as a hedge in a field in this context in Cornwall, but the field centre had very few flowers and pollinators. Now, we weren't surprised at all by that, although the A and B unit were super surprised about how little diversity there was in the middle of the fields. So it just shows how one can make assumptions about what people know, based on the fact that we kind of know that field centres are very bad for, usually, if they're managed or farmed effectively, they're not very good for wildlife. But it was a surprise to some of the people we presented the results to. Anyway, the big result here is that there are pollinators and a diversity of flowers in the road verges, and it increases as you go towards the hedge. So there's actually quite low numbers of pollinators right next to the road itself. These 2 graphs show the same thing. This one on the right shows the distance from the road, and as you can see, that the pollinator abundance goes up with distance from the road in the verge. The one on the left is the relationship between pollinator abundance and traffic vehicles per 30 minutes. And as you can see, the more traffic there is, the fewer pollinators there is. So what we've got is low pollinators right next to the road and when there's high traffic. And actually there was also, when the verges were cut, obviously the flowers have gone and there's less chance that the pollinator is going to be there, but that continued right through the season. So the pollinators didn't come back. There wasn't enough flowering after the verges were cut to enable the pollinators to come back. So that's another effect. So let's look a bit more closely at why there's fewer pollinators right close to the road, and also on busier roads. And then Ben did quite a complicated set of experiments on the different effects of different types of pollution from roads. So you've got noise, turbulence, road dust, and a combination of metals. First of all, he did a more detailed survey, just like the one I just told you about, where he assessed the pollinators at different distances in the verge, and also assessed or measured the noise, the turbulence, the dust, and the metals in the flowers that were in the nectar of the flowers, actually. So he measured those at different distances. But of course, you may well get the same trend of those dissipating with distance from the road as you do with pollinators, and it's not going to tell you which one is having an effect on pollinators, because they might all be correlated. So he also did 4 controlled experiments. The first one where he subjected a patch of flowers to noise. So this is a Bachy design, means before, after, control, impact. And what that really means is you have the same patch and you count your pollinators on that patch when there's no noise, and then you expose them to noise and you count them. And you do a control as well where it's no noise and no noise. So it's quite a clever experimental design for getting around the fact that it's difficult to give the pollinators a choice of noise or no noise. Sorry, I didn't explain that very well. Anyway, he tested the effect of noise on pollinator choices, whether the pollinators would forage there or not. He tested the effect of turbulence by having a set of fans that were automatically set up, and he was very careful to make sure the level of turbulence was similar to that they would be exposed to beside the road, and also the noise in the same way. For dust and for metals, we had a different design of experiments where you give the pollinators a choice of plants or feeders, in this case for metals, where they're either exposed to dust or not. So these pollinators could choose between plants that had road dust on them or clean plants. And in the metal experiment, they could choose between feeders that had nectar laced with metals, cadmium, copper, lead, antimony, and zinc, which are the most common road pollutant metals. And these experiments are telling you about the choices the flower visiting pollinators are making. It's not telling you whether these pollutants have a lethal effect or sublethal effect later. It's just telling you about whether they would choose to forage on plants in those conditions. Oh, so this is the result of the road survey. There's a lot of graphs going to be on this slide. On the left, again, the pollinator survey showing that beside the road, you've got fewer pollinators and more moving away. We knew that would happen. But in terms of flower density and flower species richness, it doesn't change that much with distance. So the effect on the pollinators is not because of the flower diversity and abundance. And we take the effect of flowers out of the equation first before you look for the effect of pollination. Of pollution. Pollution and pollination. Okay, that's what it should have been called, the title. Okay, so these are the different pollutants that he measured on the road survey. And as you can see, noise declines with distance from the road. All the x-axes are distance from the road. Turbulence, very high, close to the road, and then almost nothing once you get 2 meters in. What's this one? Dust, again, declines with distance, but in a more sort of linear way. And the metals, variable patterns, but mostly declining with distance. So it could have been any of them that are causing the effect on the pollinators. So that's why we needed the controlled experiments. And you'll see here that we did get some different effects. So for the noise experiment, we found no effect. Pollinators not bothered at all about road noise in this experiment. Turbulence, on the other hand, had a very strong effect. So turbulence reduced the flower visits significantly and reduced the visit duration. So how long the bees were visiting the flowers for. So if it's windy, they do get perturbed, but a lot of bumblebees can forage relatively easily in windy conditions, but actually they just don't choose to forage where it is turbulent. Dust had no effect at all. Metals had a big effect. So this was surprising to us because the levels at which we dosed the nectar with metals is very, very low. Much lower than actually you can get in some soils around, particularly down here in the southwest where we have soils that are rich in all sorts of metals. But besides the road, the level of pollution beside the road is actually, much lower than you get in background levels. So we didn't really expect to see an effect on the bees or insects foraging behaviour. And we did see a big decline in the number of visits to those flowers and the duration of those visits. So it looks like the turbulence and or the metals might be explaining why you have so few pollinators next to the road. So what does this mean in terms of managing verges for pollinators? Well, it shows that the verges can provide a useful foraging habitat, at least, that's all that we've looked at so far, for the pollinators if they're managed carefully, and one has to be smart about how you manage them. What you don't want to do is manage the area right next to the road for pollinators. You want to avoid attracting pollinators into that area because that's where they may be affected by the metals in particular. And they won't want to go there anyway because of the turbulence. So you can keep the 2 meters next to the road, very short in terms of flower visiting insects anyway. Of course, if you're choosing which roads to target for conservation of pollinators, focusing on the wider ones and the quieter ones is probably going to have more effect. And we definitely need to investigate the impacts of metals further on bees and pollinators. And actually, you need to manage those verges for nature and not just for pollinators. And this little motive comes from the plant life guidelines on verge management, which really matches what we were saying anyway. So I think we've added to the evidence base for what they're suggesting, which is cut to zone A and then manage gradually up to the hedgerow to increase the wildlife. Plant life have a very good guide for good practice and verge management. Avoid cutting in April to August, remove cuttings and mix it up, create habitat diversity. But another thing that's come out of Ben's study is that actually the ecological knowledge and evidence isn't enough to make a change in some of the big contractors who manage these road verges. Obviously, it depends on their budget, on safety, sometimes about habit of management, but also public perception. So again, we need to bring together those economic outcomes, hopefully making it cheaper, social outcomes in terms of what people expect or want to see in their road verges, or changing what they think they want to see, and ecological outcomes as well. But regions are changing their policies to take all of this into account. Cornwall has changed its policy on road verge management and has definitely gone for a much lighter touch, much less mowing now. And Dorset Council found that when they cut and collect at the end of the season, they reduce the cuttings a lot and make quite a lot of savings over the years. So there's good examples of that sort of practice now, which is both beneficial for the wildlife, but also economically as well for councils. So am I doing all right for time? Yes, okay. So just moving on to the last case study I wanted to tell you, talking about the council. So that work was with Cormac, who are the contractor who worked for Cornwall Council as well, cutting all the road verges in the southwest. And this brings me on to the final study, which is about making space for nature in Cornish towns. As I said, it's called the Green Infrastructure for Growth project, GI4G, and this was a 3 million European Union project, which the first part of it has just finished. And a big shout out here to the people who've done the work, which is this team on the left, amongst others. On the left is Dr. Rosalind Shaw, who works with me. And so she's been in the team, she's been the one making sure that any of the management options that are put into these green spaces are as environmentally friendly, if you like, or biodiversity friendly as they can possibly be, and using as many native species as possible and as local provenance as possible. And then Melissa Ralph, who's the project lead, who is a landscape architect. So it's an amazing a team, actually, a winning team really, with these different skills that bring together the real solid ecological knowledge that Ros has with that more aesthetic and knowledge of landscape architecture that you need in an urban setting, or potentially need in an urban setting. So what the benefits, so this is about public green spaces and the benefits of green urban infrastructure, and there's a lot of evidence that shows that they're important for improving the physical environment, buffering heat, lowering pollution and reducing flood risk. They increase available habitat for wildlife if managed appropriately, and they there is evidence that they will improve people's health and well-being as well. So we know all of that. The question is how you then roll that out in Cornwall in particular. So the aim of this project, GI4G, was to transform 35 hectares of pretty manky public open green space in 7 towns in Cornwall, with the aim of increasing biodiversity, one flagship group in pollinators, improving access for the local community, engaging the local communities, and providing value for money. So again, we've got the ecological, the social, and the economic outcomes that we're looking for here. The towns were chosen very carefully. They were chosen based on population and based on levels of deprivation, and actually choosing towns that do not necessarily get the attention in Cornwall. They're ones that don't tend to be on the tourist trail and ones which have green space that needs some attention. public open spaces, road verges, and churchyards and cemeteries were the types of places that they were aiming to improve. And it started out, once they'd chosen those, here's Melissa with the public, with a design brief about how you might, so this is where Melissa's skills come in particular, to design what that green space could or should look like if you're improving it for biodiversity and also for people, and making sure they have the buy-in from the community, because these places are right in the heart and the centre of where people live, and ensuring that they're engaged in them is really important, because they may be the people that volunteer to look after them, care for them in the future as well. So it's maximising the biodiversity whilst also maximising engagement of people. And there's a variety of interventions in these places. So all of these are just after some of them have been planted. Now, you could look at them and think, well, they're just gardens, but I would argue that they're not just gardens. They are managed as public spaces for the community, but the sensitivity that's gone into thinking about the wildflowers that may be planted. Yes, we call them pictorial meadows because they're not perennial grassland, sort of species-rich grassland or natural community. They are pictorial, they are managed meadows. Pollinator shrubs and perennial beds chosen for the amount of nectar and pollen and spreading that nectar and pollen resource through the season. Woodland management, woodland edge species. There's 4 other interventions. Yes, orchards, scattered parkland trees, all of which either provide berries for birds and or nectar and pollen for pollinators, spring bulbs, ponds, wetland scrapes, bird boxes and bat boxes. So these are all the interventions that were brought in, not all of them on every site, but every site had to be designed accordingly. There are interventions for people as well, paths, benches, improved gateways, and importantly, information signs like this beautiful one here. I thought I'd better have a slide on meadows as I'm talking to a meadows group, but in terms of the meadows, they went through a lot of work in terms of how to create those and how best to create those, how best Cormac could create those as the contractor that were going to do that didn't necessarily have a lot of experience in doing this at all. So they needed training, they needed the supply, all the wildflower seed that I talked about, the preparation of these pretty manky green spaces needed to be really careful, as you can imagine. And they use various options, wildflower turf, plug planting, seeded earth, yellow rattle, of course, preferably Cornish provenance. And if any of you are interested, then this booklet of how they, urban creation of urban meadows in areas of amenity grassland, so turning amenity grassland into a pictorial meadow. This is available free on the web if you want to have a quick look at that. So one example here, this is Trenawarth playing field, just on the edge of Poole, Redruth, on the sort of north coast of Cornwall. This is what it looked like before. It was a pretty manky bit of amenity grassland, used quite a lot by dog walkers and by people just, well, actually not used by a lot of people most of the time probably. They planted it with a wildflower mixture, and in the first year you can see all the annuals coming through here. So obviously the nectar and pollen in that area have been massively increased, and there were a lot of bees on it. And thanks to Melissa and Ros for all the photos that I'm showing you here. That clearly improved that site in terms of what it looks like and to people in the community, but also in terms of how whether pollinators will be attracted into it. In the second year, mercifully, you can see all the perennials coming through. So you've got all the vetches and the clovers in here, and many more legumes coming through. So you can see that it's not just an annual wildflower mixture, it's more perennial as well. And Cormac have changed how they manage verges and all these spaces by purchasing grillos, which seems to be the most one of the most important outcomes of this project, is that Cornwall is buying grillos for cutting and collecting and harvesting seed from them. I don't know much about them, but I'm sure you probably know more about such machines than I do. As I said, it's very much about engagement with the public and creating volunteer groups who can help with the planting and help with the maintenance going forward as well. And that provides all sorts of other benefits. We're trying to measure the impacts of the interventions. So Ros is assessing the impacts on biodiversity. So she's got surveys before the interventions and after. She's assessing the impacts on people and their recreation as well. And we're also trying to estimate the storage of carbon and their role in flood regulation, which is quite tricky. But for every site, there's an environmental growth management plan, which is about how you look after it in 1 year, in 5 years, in 10 years, to make sure you keep those benefits going over time. Let's just talk about how she measures the impact on biodiversity. It is a tricky one because we don't have lots of people who can go out there and monitor what's happening. And so we're trying to use the new tool that is being used in planning and development now about biodiversity net gain. How do you use simple indicators to show that an area has a net gain in biodiversity without being able to count all the species that are there? And this is about assessing the area and distinctiveness and the quality or condition of that habitat. It's pretty complicated because there's not many good indicators of amenity grass and improved grassland in urban areas. However, Ros has made good progress on that, and it will be written into a nice paper. And just for one site, the biodiversity score using all of these characteristics before the intervention was 3, and afterwards it was 8. I know that doesn't mean much if you don't know what's gone into that black box to calculate those scores, but it's finding simple ways in which we can monitor these going forward. In terms of the impacts on people, as I said, it's really important to the council that there are social outcomes as well, and in these particular towns. Does improving biodiversity and access to these green spaces actually result in increased visit frequency or duration and increased positive views and enjoyment, ? So we've done this in 2 ways. The first being a social survey with 350 responses for the 19 sites, and something called SOPARK, which is a standardized way of assessing who's using green spaces, both before and after interventions. And the results of the questionnaire, just to show one to you, one question on this questionnaire, I think there were about 20 questions, is if the following changes were made to your local green space, would you visit more or less often? This was before the changes were made. And you can see that this varies. So what I find interesting in this is that actually at this end where they say the percentage of respondents say they would visit the green space more are a lot of the interventions that are about biodiversity. So more wildflowers, bird nest boxes, different kinds of vegetation, scattered trees. And as you go along here, they're less likely to visit if the site is busier with more people. So we've got a bit of a loop going on there that I'm not sure how we get around that, but we all know that there's a threshold of people in a wild space. And if you've got, the threshold's lower for some people than others, I guess. So the challenge is how you encourage lots of people to visit, but the density is not too high that it puts them off. I guess you just need more of them, and then that spreads people out. In terms of this SOPARK study that I mentioned, and this is one of our team, bless her, standing there counting the number of people who are recreating on this piece of green space before it was managed. And as you can see, these are sites along the bottom here, and the blue is before they went through the process of our interventions and improvements, and the red is after. And you can see at almost every site, there are more people visiting in the particular time when the survey was taken. This is one site where it wasn't, but I think that's because actually that's a site where they play football both before and after. So that's a sort of outlier. But yes, more people are visiting these sites, and they've had amazing, I say we, the team have had amazing feedback. In summary, they've transformed 44 hectares of urban green space. Their target was 35, so that's fantastic. Definitely biodiversity gains, thousands of whips and transplants, over 300 trees planted, 84 engagement events, huge amount of positive interaction with the local communities. They've won 3 awards, and I'm really pleased that they've managed to get a second phase of the project because it's been so successful. So 28 hectares in 7 more towns are now underway and being developed right as we speak in Launceston, Liskeard, St Austell, Bodmin. Oh, I sound like I'm on a train. That's what the train man says. This Launceston, Liskeard, St Austell, Bodmin, Penryn, Falmouth and Newquay. Sorry, they're the stations in the order as you go west, pretty much. So this is my final slide. Andrew's pleased. I'm running out of time. Hopefully I've shown you some examples of how we're trying to change the scene in the southwest for pollinators and hopefully for other wildlife as well. And these dots here are all of the projects that we're involved with in some way or another that we know about in terms of pollinators in particular. I'm pretty sure there's some others out there that aren't dots on the map yet. But at the same time, improving those sites for people or people's aesthetic enjoyment or recreation means that we're more likely to get more of them if we can combine those benefits, but also thinking about the businesses themselves and what might be the economic outcomes of some of these changes. And finally, just a thanks to the team that's part of our ESI team there. And these are the 3 people who've delivered all the work that I've talked about today. And thanks to all of our collaborators and funders. The end. Silence. Has Andrew fallen asleep?
No, I'm still awake. Thank you very much indeed. Okay. Do you want to stop
Yes.
screen sharing now?
Good idea.
That's it. Okay. You can, if you have any questions, please type them in to the chat box, or let's live dangerously. Unmute yourselves, and
we can see you.
If you all try and speak at once, it won't work. But let's just see what happens. I'll start off. I've got a couple of questions. Well, one is just a point, actually. There were earlier a few months ago, we had the Welsh Biodiversity Partnership Conference, which I've never been to before. But since all I have to do now to attend it is just come in this office and sit in front of the screen, I did go to quite a lot there. And there was quite a lot on road verges, including from people in councils who are responsible for road verge management. And there's quite a lot of new machinery designed for cutting and collecting, or other ways where they can get the cut material off. But the question I had was, given the what you showed us, the work has shown on how on a wider road verge, the bit right next to the road is not so good for turbulence and metal pollution reasons and so on. And the further away from the road you get, things improve. Well, thinking during lockdown, we've been going for walks. We can't drive anywhere to go for walks, so we just walk around the lanes near where we live. And nearly all the little roads we walk on, the road verge is just a steep bank either side of a single track road. Now, that is very close to the road. Does that mean there's not really much you can do with them to help pollinating insects?
Yes, good question. I've been worrying about that because I live on windy roads with vertical hedges at the side as well, as you know.
I know, I've been down them.
But no, I don't think there is much that you can do, actually. And what I'm interested in is actually, do those vertical areas mean we've got worse, what does it mean for the metals, for example? And does that mean that anything that is foraging, if you've got amazing campion like we would have here in those areas that are going up the side of the Cornish hedges, is it actually a really bad thing if the insects end up foraging there? But they're choosing where they forage as well. So if they are choosing not to, but you're right, it's an open question. I just
point out that if you're talking about the banks, the boundary between the highway, which is what the verge is, and the private land is the base of the bank. So as soon as you're talking about what is on the banks, the highway authority that cut the verges don't have any right to be involved in what vegetation is on the bank.
Yeah, so that's the other complexity of it, isn't it? So I mean, that's why it was easier, really, from a health and safety perspective, for Ben to choose ones where we actually had real, good sized verges, which isn't necessarily normal for rural roads in Cornwall. It's an open question, I guess.
The other point is, on very small single track roads, there's going to be far less traffic. So there's going to be less turbulence and possibly less pollution.
Exactly. So maybe we're over worrying about that. Oh, that's my alarm to tell me I should shut up if I was still giving my talk. So that's fine.
Don't shut up yet.
Okay.
I'll tell you when. And another thing that came up on the road verge section at the WBP conference was that often if councils or highway agencies don't cut the verge, loads of people will complain. They'll get lots of complaints. You haven't cut the verge. I pay my council tax. Why isn't the verge been cut? And people don't tend to contact the authorities to congratulate them if they manage them in a different way. So I think it's up to people who care about it to do that, to let the councils know, yes, you're doing a good thing by not having cut it.
I agree. And also with Ben wants, the next thing he wants to do is a social survey on actually how people feel about road verges and what they would put up with, to, you know, so that actually we've got some evidence to share with Highways England and Cormac about what is acceptable, but also what information could be given to people that maybe makes them think about road verges in a different way. You know, I can imagine sorry, I'm being distracted by somebody waving outside. That's not helping. I think he's got a point to make. What was I saying? Right, so I wondered whether that, you know, so you've got kids in the back of, well, no, not either of us, but people have kids in the back of the car going on long journeys. Maybe you have some app as to look out for this on your road verges. You know, have you seen a road verge that like this? Can you make it that people actually start to think of the verge as part of their journey that they're looking at and thinking about, rather than just looking into the landscape beyond? So people are not necessarily just thinking about it as a safety thing, but that's about changing people's perceptions completely, isn't it? And there's questions coming through. Am I supposed to? Oh, yes.
Yes, you can read them. That's fine.
Okay, walkers and riders. Sorry, Pete, did you have a point?
Well, it's just Cornwall Council are currently running a survey asking people, the public, to comment on their management.
Oh, there we go.
Which is an opportunity to people give positive or negative.
Yes. So Cornwall Council are running a survey, thank you, on what people think about road verges. So they should get the positive and the negative. And we will make sure yes, that if enough people know about it, they should get both.
Yeah, maybe all councils should do that.
How does this link in with the use of verges by walkers and riders? Good question. We didn't consider that. We were tending to use verges where there weren't walkers or riders. And I don't quite know how to answer it. I mean, I guess they're being affected by the pollution in the same way as the pollinators are. I'll put the link into the chat for the meadow. That's really a sort of case study in how they delivered meadow, or how they worked with Cormac, a massive contractor, to deliver meadows in these public green space sites. So it'd be very different from the sort of meadows that you guys might be creating, I would guess, but it's got very similar ideas and thoughts in it. Yes, Richard.
Yes, you can answer Richard's question.
Yes. Would you be willing to do a similar? Yes, sure, absolutely. No problem. I'm just going to find that link while I'm talking to you for the meadow thing.
Yeah, the species rich turf is quite an unusual one. That I know there's experiments been done on that at the National Botanic Garden of Wales with I can't remember what it was in the turf, but that was transplanted to another field. Richard will remember, if Richard's still here.
Yeah, it was Cirsium dissectum, the meadow thistle.
Oh yeah.
But it was I discovered it on by doing a consultancy job, and it was on the playing fields of Two Cross School, and it had been left completely undisturbed and unfertilized, the whole of this sort of sports field, since about 1930s or something like that. And they were going to extend the school building. So both, well, I sort of alerted the planners to it, and the county council then insisted that a certain amount of the meadow was translocated then as turfs to the Botanic Garden. And that was done, well, must be about 10 years ago now, and I suppose, and it's been there ever since, and it seems to be fairly successful. But I mean, I've been involved in other similar transplants as well on other sites, but they can be successful, but it all depends very much on getting the hydrology and the soil conditions right, obviously from the donor to the recipient sites.
I mean, yes, and that brings up another point, that actually it was really, the Cornwall Council were really keen for Ros to do as many pre-intervention surveys as possible to make sure we didn't end up, so they didn't, so they knew there was nothing really important there in the first place before they made their interventions, because these were really old scrubby bits of green space that hadn't been used or looked after for years. So potentially they could have had some interesting species there. As it turned out, I don't think they did. I mean, there were a few road verges that did have orchids in, but they were kind of known about and they've been maintained in most cases. There's been the odd disaster where they've been all cut down by mistake, even though it wasn't in the management plan, but you know, it happens perennially, doesn't it? Or maybe just in Cornwall, I don't know. But people care about it more now than they used to. It makes the papers a lot more often than it used to, or more, you know, with more outrage than it used to, which is interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Another question there, you mentioned a farmer setting up a trial project on economic value of growing wildflowers. Have you got any more details?
Not at this moment, not really. In fact, the people, well, it's the Lost Gardens of Heligan that we're working with on trying to make the business case more clear, and that will be published eventually. We don't have it at the moment, except actually I could probably find the link to the video that Alistair Moore from Heligan did. He did a little talk on it in one of our recent workshops, and it's available to the public. So I can find that and send it to you, Andrew, so you can circulate.
I can circulate that.
So it doesn't have all the answers, but we are trying to develop this business case for what it looks like, and really with annuals as the entry point, if you like. If you can encourage growers or people with land to grow annuals in the first place, then they start to think about flowers in a different way and potentially move on to the harder stuff later. You talk about health benefits of pollinator plants. Oh, I don't know if there's a question there, David.
Yeah, sorry, I don't know whether you're coming through here. I was thinking you were talking about the health benefits. Have there been any complaints about hay fever in relation to pollen?
No, and not that I know of. And we tend to think mostly that the plants that are good for bees and other insects in particular tend to have sticky pollen, which doesn't cause hay fever, except things like oilseed rape, which is a different one where people can be seriously allergic to oilseed rape or the brassicas. But with most wildflowers, I would suggest if people have got hay fever, it's because there's long grasses rather than the flowers themselves. So, I mean, I know that's a kind of slightly pedantic point I'm making there, but I always try to encourage people that actually hay fever isn't necessarily because of the flowers that are good for the bees. Are you involved with honeybee keepers? Yes, yes, yes. And how all this impacts on their honeybees. Very good question from Diana there. We work a lot with the West Cornwall beekeepers and the Cornwall beekeepers, who are separate groups. Yes, there's an interesting questions down here about densities of honeybee colonies and how many you can have, because do we have enough forage? And all of this is potentially going to be good for them if we can genuinely increase the areas of nectar and pollen resource available. And yes, we're connecting it all up.
Well, I can answer Kerry's question. The best way of, if you want yellow rattleseed, is to find someone fairly near you who's got some yellow rattle plants. It's very, very easy to collect the seed yourself. You just need a little dish or a bowl or a bucket or something, and you just bend the plants over and shake them in. And when they rattle, hence the name, you know the seeds will fall out. It's very easy to do. And in the Meadows group, we are very happy to put one person in. It gets complicated because of data protection rules, but we can put someone who wants yellow rattle seed in touch with, or ask if there's anyone nearby who was happy to collect it for them, or for them to come and collect it. I mean, we've had other people in the group come and collect seed from our field, and we got, when we first started our meadows off, we collected yellow rattle from a field which was 2 miles away from our house. So yeah, it's you don't really need to buy it.
Meadow matching. Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
There's a question, another good one from Diana. Are you using late winter, early spring flowers? Yes. So particularly in the last study I talked about with the Cornish towns, Rosa has been really keen to make sure we have this very long season of nectar and pollen, not just for bees, but also for all of the other very early insects and very late insects. So yes, that's why they have spring bulbs in there and snowdrops. Really important. We've just published some other research which shows it's the gaps in forage are making a very big difference to bees, more so than possibly the amount of forage. It's if they have gaps in the season. So that is important.
Diana Wormold is actually also known as Julian Wormold, and he's one of the world's greatest galanthophiles. He's probably got the national collection of snowdrops.
That's wonderful. And I was just worrying about the fact that I'm very lucky. My snowdrops have come out in our little bit of wood, and I was upset at the fact that I don't know enough about snowdrops and the different varieties, and I have no idea which ones they are, but they're wonderful.
Can you hear me, Andrew?
Yes, I can.
No, I was just going to say, this is Diana, aka Julian.
Hello, Diana.
Hi. No, just to say, it made my day today because we had temperatures of 6 degrees C, but some of these swarms that flew into hives last year were out foraging on snowdrops, actually, and Daphne,
yep.
And taking pollen and nectar into the hives, even at 6 degrees C today. And they could only do that for kind of half an hour or an hour. But, you know, I've perceived that if there are gaps, particularly early in the year, because we never see bumbles out until the end of February here. But for honeybees, I think it does make a big difference.
Yeah. So Pete, my husband, who's got honeybee hives in the orchard, we saw them bringing snowdrop pollen in at the weekend as well for the first time. We were amazed because it was it was almost raining. I mean, it wasn't honeybee weather at all.
Yeah.
I don't know why they were out, but they're hungry, I suppose.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
They must be pretty desperate to go out in 6 degrees and in the rain.
Well, and collecting pollen as well. That means they've started rearing.
Exactly.
brood.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They must be trying to make more bees.
It was still January.
Yeah.
It's Cornwall.
Right. Any more here? Yes. Matt Sutton, Windrush. Yes, that's Windrush it's a firm. I can't remember exactly where it is in Pembrokeshire, but it's not far over the border. And Matt Sutton, I know, has done brush harvesting in the Winelass Meadows. That's the National Nature Reserve that's on the National Botanic Gardens site. Early on, he did a lot of brush harvesting there and collected meadow seed from there, but he does it from his own meadows as well. Yes. There's someone who's only known as AE 2020 with a comment there. Pembrokeshire needs funding for planting for wildflower verges. Ah, okay. Ah, yes, the Llantec Gardening Group. Yes, I know them. Yes. Someone's put Windrush's website up in the chat there. I've got a couple more questions. The field that you showed that had been replanted, it was a sort of, looked like a, as you said, a sort of manky bit of grass with dog walkers and things. And you showed us what it looked like afterwards. Did anyone moan about that it was harder to walk through to take their dogs for a walk? Do you know?
Because they are making, I'm guessing. I know the generalities that actually the way that they've designed them, they've made sure they've also increased access in terms of paths, and it's much clearer where people should walk. So they've made sure that access is covered and people can walk around. And as far as I'm aware, they've had hardly any or virtually no complaints about these places. They've had, you know, really wonderful responses from people, and the community love it because they still walk their dogs there. They've just got nice flowers to look at instead. So yeah, by making sure they take account of access as well, and don't just focus on the biodiversity thing, I think that's made a big difference to how the community feel about these spaces, because they feel it's being done for them and not just the council coming in and plonking something on a playing field they used to run about in. They know why it's been done, and they've sort of taken them on that,
right,
for want of a better phrase, with them.
Another thing I'd like to raise, when you and I both worked at Rothamsted, a lot of the projects we did were on farmland, you know, within a fairly large radius of where we were. And a lot of the experiments we did out there, and a lot of the work and recording and so on, was on say wildflower strips planted by farmers. Now in Eastern England, which is mostly arable farming, when we moved to Wales, because Wales is very different, there's in Carmarthenshire, certainly there's almost no arable farming. It's a bit different in Pembrokeshire, but I'm guessing that Cornwall is fairly similar. It's not so easy when most of the land is either for grazing or producing silage to have those sort of insect friendly margins to fields. So when we came here, I thought, well, there are some things that are better about it. There's loads more hedgerows. Hedges are good. There's lots more hedges because there aren't huge combine harvesters having to get in. But there doesn't seem to be the same opportunity for sort of stewardship type measures that farmers, I mean, there are Glass-Steer type grants for doing things for biodiversity, but it seems there's less opportunity to do that in livestock farming areas. Do you agree with that? Is that like that in Cornwall, would you say?
I do agree with that. I think what we have a lot of potatoes and daffodils, so we do have that as horticultural, I suppose. So that's where we would, But in terms, we have a lot of pasture and green desert, and I think that's why we started thinking, this can't just be about agri-environment schemes. This can't just be about what they do on the edges. This has to be central to their business. And is it really, how much could they make from trying to grow yellow rattle in a perennial sward, because it has to be in a grassy sward? Could that really be an option? Because livestock isn't frankly a very commercial option right now. So actually, and would they take the risk? And I guess we're still in that process, and some of them will and are taking that risk, but it feels like it needs to be it can't just be around the edges anymore, because as you say, that doesn't necessarily work in a pasture rich
no,
place.
if it's a silage field that's getting loads of nitrogen, a 20-foot strip at the edge is also going to have lots of nitrogen.
Exactly,
so,
which is so herbal lays, which are potentially good for the cattle, and where they're not putting artificial fertilizers on, and they're able to grow on more mixed diversity, is another thing. And that's not necessarily for seed production, but that's about diverse grasslands for your livestock. So I think we need to not just focus on what people are going to do in the agri-environment edges, because we're never going to get enough. There's never going to be enough land in that, and it's too complicated anyway. I mean, we are sort of working with a couple of the projects that are working on the new environmental land management schemes, the ELMS, which are going to replace the countryside stewardship post-Brexit. And hopefully, though, you know, it looks like they have the right, they're saying all the right words about what those are going to deliver in terms of biodiversity and carbon and so forth.
Yeah, they're definitely saying the right things, but the reality, we don't know yet, do we?
No, we don't. But it does mean, and I mean, I think the really important thing is that farmers, you know, suddenly may have to pivot their business to actually producing something else, which might be trees, or it might be all sorts of things. And what the training is that's going to enable them to do that is a big question that's in my head at the moment, and we're trying to think about that. Particularly, I mean, sorry, I'm getting onto a slightly different topic, but the Duchy of Cornwall are really keen that their tenant farmers are in a very good place to take up whatever these new schemes look like. So we're working with them on thinking about how you train farmers, landowners and land stewards in natural capital, to use that horrible phrase, or biodiversity management and carbon management and flood management. And you know, what the farmers know a lot already, but what else do they need to know to be able to sort of pivot their business towards producing Gove's public goods? George Eustace is our MP here, he's the DEFRA minister.
Well, I wonder if that will help.
I'm going to stop now. This is being recorded. You got the mute button.
Comment from Colin, who is Carmarthenshire Meadows Group's treasurer. He would he'd be very interested in the Asian hornet stuff. So email me whatever you want about Asian hornets and I'll send it to Colin. All
right. Can I just shall I show one slide so you know what they look like? Because I worry that people don't recognise them. Have I got a minute, half a second?
Certainly. You'll have to screen share again.
I'll do that. I'm on it. I'm on it. Don't worry, I'm not going to start another talk. Oh, that seems to have gone a bit weird. No, there it is. Here it is. So, Asian hornet, very black body, orange tail, orange head, yellow legs, as opposed to the European hornet, which is much more brown and yellow. And if you think you've spotted one, download the Asian Hornet Watch app and preferably try and take a photo of it so that you can send it in, because we are looking out for these invasive species, which is just about getting to the UK and has spread through France and across Europe in the last 10 years. Shall I stop sharing there?
Okay. Just to make the point, despite what the tabloids said, it's not the giant Asian hornet. It's actually somewhat smaller than the native one. Comment there from Diana Julian again about lousewort. It's another hemiparasite.
Good for early bumblebees. Okay, yes, good. Excellent.
Oh yes, note there about the Welsh Government white paper consultation. Yeah. Yes. Okay, if there's no more questions popping up on the chat line, we're at 5 to 9 now anyway. It's been great. Yeah, it's been very good. Thank you very much. And what a lot of clever bee stewards you are down there in Cornwall.
That sounds slightly rude. Thank you. I've enjoyed it immensely.
So thank you very much indeed. And we shall speak again soon, Juliet, and thank you everybody for coming. We've got another talk exactly 1 month from tonight on the 3rd of March, and that will be Dr. Kevin McGinn for the National Botanic Garden of Wales, who's going to be telling us about their seed bank and more about the Wildflower Meadows at the nature reserve at the Botanic Garden. So that's exactly a month from tonight. Okay, that's it then. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for coming, and thank you, Juliet. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Andrew.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye.